Almost every cuber can make the basic checkerboard pattern on a 3x3. In fact, you probably also know how to do it on a 5x5. But what about the more difficult even layer cubes like the 4x4? Did you know that there's actually 2 different variations? What about the cube and a cube and a cube pattern? Did you know that you can make it on bigger cubes like the 6x6? Or how about my personal favorite, the Superflip? It looks incredible, especially on cubes as big as a 7x7. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make 5 of the best Rubik's Cube patterns, starting each one with a 3x3 version, then moving on to some fun variations, and how to do them on bigger cubes up to a 7x7 or higher. So, starting off with the basic checkerboard pattern. This is one of the easiest and nicest looking patterns you can do on a standard Rubik's Cube, which is why it's usually one of the first patterns that every cuber learns. But if you don't already know how to do it on a 3x3, that's okay. I'll show you right now. Basically, every single checkerboard pattern involves a lot of double moves, like this, where you turn a side 180 degrees. Now, there's of course 6 different sides you can turn on a standard 3x3 cube, and to do a checkerboard pattern, all you have to do is a double turn like that on every single one of those 6 sides. So you start with 2 of them opposite of each other like this, and then you move on to a different axis, do the 2 of them opposite of each other, and then onto the final axis that you haven't done it on yet. And there we go. We now have our checkerboard. So you can kind of think of it as 3 sets of 2 double moves with rotations in between. So for example, we do 2 double moves, rotate, 2 double moves, rotate, and 2 double moves. You just have to make sure you hit every single side. It doesn't matter where you start or what order you do it in, as long as you always do those 3 sets of 2 double moves. And of course, you can always undo it by doing the exact same thing, again, in any order. Anyway, let's skip over the 2x2 and 4x4 cubes for now, because again, the even layer checkerboards are a little bit more complicated, and let's head straight on to the 5x5, which is very easy. On this cube, the process is essentially the same as on a 3x3, except instead of doing just 2 double turns on each axis, we now have so many more layers that we have to do a bunch of double turns. So you just start on one axis and do as many double turns as possible, and then you flip to another axis and repeat. Basically, the key to a checkerboard pattern is doing as many double turns as possible on every single axis. So once again, we rotate to the one axis we haven't done yet and do a bunch of double turns. And there we go. We now have our checkerboard pattern complete. And again, the order and starting position don't matter, and you can undo it in the exact same way that you did it. Just make sure to do as many double turns as possible on every single axis. So by now, you should pretty much have a good idea of how to do the checkerboard pattern on any bigger cube with an odd number of layers. Just do double turns, as many as possible, switch to another axis, and repeat 3 different times. And then, no matter if it's a 3x3 or 13x13, you'll end up with a checkerboard. It really is the classic pattern to do on any Rubik's Cube. However, things get a little bit more complicated when it comes to the even layer cubes. Like I mentioned, there's actually 2 different ways of doing it, at least on the 4x4 and higher, so I'm going to start with the easiest version on the 2x2. Now the basic idea of doing the checkerboard is actually pretty similar. It's just doing a bunch of double moves. The only reason it's more difficult is because you now have to do them in a very specific order. It's also not possible to get a perfect checkerboard on every single side of an even layer cube, so the first thing you have to do is decide which 2 sides you want to leave blank. So in my case, I like to leave white and yellow blank. So that way, we'll end up with a checkerboard on just these 4 sides. So what I'm going to do first is hold one of these 2 sides that I've chosen towards me, white or yellow. And then on one of the 2 sides that are most accessible, we're going to do a double turn, like this. And then we're going to do a double turn on the other one of those 2 axes. So like this. And then finally, we're going to undo that very first double move we did. So like this. You'll know that you did this correctly when you have these lines going around each side. Then you can finish it off by doing one more double turn through the 3rd axis that you haven't turned yet. So it'll be kind of like cutting through the lines. And there we go. Here is our 2x2 checkerboard pattern. Now you can undo the pattern by doing the exact same thing. So choose one of these 2 sides that are blank, hold it towards you, and do not turn that side yet. So choosing from the other 2 axes, we do one double turn, a different double turn, and then undo that first double turn. And then finish it off on the last axis with one more double turn. So now that we've done a basic 2x2 checkerboard pattern, let's go ahead and expand that to the 4x4. Again, it's pretty much the exact same thing, just with more layers. So we're going to choose one side to stay blank and hold that towards us. And then on one of the 2 possible axes, we're going to start doing some double turns. And because this is a bigger cube, we're going to have to do more double turns. Again, just as many as possible. Now, holding the cube in the same orientation, we turn the other side with as many double turns as possible, like this. And then we go ahead and undo that first set of double turns, like that. Once again, you'll know that you've done it right once you have these lines running all the way around the cube, and you can finish it off by just doing a final set of double moves on the final axis, like that. So let's review that one more time, which again will bring us back to a solved state. We hold one of these blank sides towards us, we do all of our double turns, switch to the other axis with that side still facing towards us, and then undo that first set of double moves, and then we can go ahead and finish it off with the last set. As you'd expect, it's exactly the same thing on the 6x6 or any bigger even layer cube for that matter. Hold the side to be blank towards you, do as many double moves as possible in one direction, and then in the other direction, and then back in the first direction, undoing those first moves. And then you have a bunch of lines all the way around the cube, and you can finish it off by cutting all of those lines and making a checkerboard. Now, this is the only way to do a checkerboard pattern on the 2x2, but on a 4x4 and higher, there is actually an alternate variation that I think looks a little bit nicer. So let's go ahead and demonstrate this method on the 4x4. Basically what we're going to do first is pretend that the 4x4 is a 2x2 by just turning these inner layers like this. So we're going to do a 2x2 checkerboard pattern just like you would normally do, just like that. And then on top of that, we're going to pretend that the 4x4 is one layer smaller than it actually is, so like a 3x3, and we're going to do a 3x3 checkerboard pattern. So instead of just turning the inner layers, we're going to turn everything but the inner layers. Just as if the 4x4 were a 3x3, we're going to do double layers like this, skipping that middle one, double layers like this, and double layers like this. And here we go. We now have a variation on the 4x4 checkerboard that's no longer blank on two of the sides. You still have the full 4x4 checkerboard on the four normal sides, but you now also have this sort of extra 3x3 checkerboard on the two opposite sides, which in my opinion looks a little bit better than just being totally blank. This is the most checkered you can make a 4x4. Anyway, let's go ahead and try it out in the 6x6 real quick because it looks even cooler on this puzzle. So we start out with a basic 2x2 checkerboard pattern like this. And now, because it's a 6x6, we're going to step one down by ignoring these middle layers and do a checkerboard pattern just like we would on a 5x5. So we're going to do just these and these layers. So the key is you just always skip over that middle layer because we've already done the 2x2 checkerboard. And here it is, our modified 6x6 checkerboard complete. And as you can see, it looks amazing, even if it's not exactly a perfect checkerboard on all sides. Anyway, that is our full lineup of checkerboards, 2x2 through 7x7, as good as you can make them. But that took a long time, so let's go ahead and move on. The next pattern is another one of the most basic ones you can learn, but it also has some very fun variations once you start getting up into bigger puzzles. This is what some people call the flower pattern. I just call it the dots. This one's going to be a little bit easier to explain, and I'll show you two different variations that you can do. So the basic idea behind the first variation is that you're just cycling groups of 3 centerpieces. So you're going to cycle these 3 centerpieces as well as these 3 opposite centerpieces. So I like the color combination of white, green, and red, so I'm going to cycle these 3 centerpieces, but you can choose any 3 adjacent centerpieces that you want. So start by holding the colors towards you like this, and then it's going to help if you're able to do a middle layer turn kind of like this. So what I'm doing is just pushing with my finger, as you can see down at the bottom there. But if you're not able to do that, you can also do it in 2 parts by moving the middle layer up and then moving the side next to it back down. So we're going to start by doing one of these slice turns over on the left side of your 3 chosen colors, kind of like this. So we're going to move all those pieces upward. Then we're going to move over to the right side and do the same thing. Move the middle layer upward like that. And then we're going to move back over to the left side and actually undo that first move that we did by turning this slice layer now downward. Then we're going to move back over to the right side and undo the second move that we did by turning the right slice layer downward. And there we go. We've now finished the dot pattern by cycling our 3 chosen centers as well as the 3 other centers. To undo the pattern is pretty simple. You just kind of have to do things in the other direction. So instead of starting with the left slice like this, you now start with the right slice. So first, make sure that the 3 colors you cycled are still facing towards you, and then move this right slice upward. Then we can move the left slice upward, and then we can undo those 2 moves, undoing the right slice and undoing the left slice. Now before moving on to any bigger puzzles, I want to show you a different variation of this pattern on the 3x3. Basically, instead of having 6 dots, this version only has 4. So we'll choose which sides not to have dots on, let's say white and yellow, and hold that kind of on the top and bottom. Now what we have to do is just a single slice move in this middle layer. It doesn't matter which direction, it'll all come out the same way. And now we're going to do a double slice turn, 180 degrees on one of the other axes. It doesn't actually matter which one, let's just do it right here. So 1 and 2. And then all we're going to do is undo that first move, so undo the slice like that, and then undo the second move. So undo the double move like that. And there we go. Here's the 4 dot variation of this pattern. This time to undo it, we can just do the exact same thing we did to make it. As long as we have the 2 blank sides on top and bottom, we can just do any slice move in the middle, a double slice move like this, undo that first move, undo that second move, and our cube is solved. Now again, let's move straight on to the 5x5 because it makes more sense to do the dots on odd layer cubes, and let's start off with the 6 dot version. Basically, to expand this pattern to the 5x5, we're just going to do the pattern twice, each time on a different set of layers. So we're going to start out by doing it on the middle layers like this, and then we're going to finish by doing it on the middle layers like this. So let's go ahead and stick with our same 3 colors facing towards us, and we'll go ahead and do the pattern on these bigger middle layers. So we're going to move the left one upward, the right one upward, the left one back down, and the right one back down. There we go. We have 1 layer of dots. And now we're going to move on to these inner layers like this. So we're going to move the left one upward, the right one upward, the left one downward, and the right one downward. And there we go. This is the reason that I like the dots pattern so much, because it looks so cool on bigger puzzles. To undo the pattern, we're just going to do everything in reverse. So we're going to start on the right side with the inner layers, and then over to the left side, and then back down on the right side, and back down on the left side. Then we can move to the outer layers like this, up, up, down, down, and there we go, our 5x5 is back to solved. Now, as you'd expect, you can also do the 4-dot version of this pattern on the 5x5 as well, in pretty much the exact same way. Start out by choosing your top and bottom layers, do a single slice turn on kind of the outer layers like this, a double slice turn through the middle, undo, and undo, and then we can go ahead and do a single slice turn on the inner middle layers, a double slice turn, undo, and undo. And there we go. Here's our cool variation of the 4 dots on the 5x5. And of course, undoing it is just as easy as doing it in reverse. Start out with the very single inner layer, and then move on to the set of inner layers like this. And there we go. Finally, it should be pretty self-explanatory to move on up to the 7x7. We're going to start with this very outer set of middle layers, going up on the left, up on the right, back down, and back down. And then we're going to move on to the next set of inner layers. So we're just going to go 1 layer in, kind of like this, and like this, and that, and that. And then same thing, going in as far as possible to the single inner layer, just like this. And there we go, our dots pattern is now complete. And just look at how cool that is. I think you can figure out how to undo this one. Just start in the middle and work outward. Like that. Finally, let's go ahead and do the 4-dot version, which should also be very self-explanatory at this point. So we choose our top and bottom, do a single slice turn on the outermost layers, a double turn, a single turn, a double turn, and then just keep on repeating through all the different sets of layers, just like this. And just keep on repeating through each layer until you come to this. There we go. Now, when it comes to doing the dots on even layer cubes, there's not a whole lot I can say. Obviously, since the dots require moving around centers, there's nothing you can do on a 2x2. On a 4x4, you technically can do the dots, but it's not any different from doing it on a 3x3. It'll just end up looking like this, pretty much as if you had just used your 4x4 as a 3x3, and same thing goes with the 6x6 and the 5x5. It's pretty much the exact same thing. So just stick with odd layer cubes when you're doing the dots. Anyway, that's about it for this pattern. Next up, this pattern is called cube and a cube and a cube. This is one of everyone's favorite patterns, and it looks really good on any cube, 2x2 and up. The only downside is that it is pretty tricky to make, and it'll help you a lot if you already know 3x3 notation, so like U, R, F prime, but I'll try and demonstrate it in a way where you don't need to know any of that. The good thing is, there's not really a whole lot for me to explain. You just have to choose which 3 colors you want cycled around like this, and then hold them kind of to the right like this. Now, go ahead and do this algorithm on screen if you can read it, otherwise follow along with the moves that I'm doing. So, U prime, L prime, U prime, F prime, R2, B prime, R, F, U, B2, U, B prime, L, U prime, F, U, R, F prime. Feel free and rewind and slow that down if you need to, or better yet, check out a video on basic 3x3 notation. That way you can just read the letters rather than watching the moves. Now there's actually a little trick to undo the pattern. Instead of holding it in the same way that you did to make the pattern, instead take a look at the other 3 colors on the back, and now hold it as if you were doing the pattern on these 3 colors. By the way, it doesn't matter which way it's rotated as long as this corner is on the right, and now we just go ahead and do that algorithm again. So U prime, L prime, U prime, F prime. Go ahead and rewind if you need to watch it. And there we go. Your cube will then become solved. Now let's go ahead and move straight onto the 2x2 this time, because it's actually very similar. All you have to do is hold your 3 colors on the upper right, and then go ahead and do the same algorithm as you did before. It's exactly the same thing as on the 3x3. Just go ahead and do the moves, and there we go. There is our cube in a cube. Now if you look closely, you may notice that this corner is actually twisted the wrong direction compared to on this cube, and that's because we used a 3x3 algorithm on an even layer cube. Now it doesn't actually matter that much in the case of a 2x2, but it will matter later on once we get to the 4x4 and higher. So here's the shortcut version, by the way. The way that we solve this problem is, rather than starting the algorithm on the 3 colors that we want, we instead start with the 3 opposite colors, so over here. So we hold these colors on the right instead, and then go ahead and do our algorithm one more time. And this way, we will actually twist the corner in the correct direction relative to on the 3x3. There we go. Now what that means if you want to undo this pattern is that you actually have to start on the front side with your desired colors, because normally you'd have to undo the pattern on the back side, but because it's a 2x2, you have to do the opposite of that. So you start your algorithm from here. Now moving on to the 4x4, the way that you do, in this case, the cube and a cube and a cube and a cube, is essentially by repeating that same algorithm on different sets of layers. So to start, we're essentially going to pretend that it's like a 3x3 and only turn the outer layers like these. After that, we're going to do the 2x2 version on the inner layers like this. So starting out with the outer layers, we do U prime, L prime, U prime, F prime, just around the cube like this, like you would do on a 3x3. Finish up the algorithm like that. And then, before we do the 2x2 version on these inner layers, we have to make sure that we move the cube around to the opposite side for the reason that I explained earlier. Otherwise, it'll twist the corner in the wrong direction. And now we can go ahead and begin our algorithm, the exact same one, but now on the inner layers, just like we would do on a 2x2. Just like this, and there we go. Here is our 4x4 cube and a cube and a cube and a cube complete. Now to undo the pattern, as always, we're just going to do the same algorithms that we did to make it. So we're going to start with the inner layer 2x2 version, but because we created the 2x2 part of the pattern from the back side of the cube, that means we have to undo it from the front side. So we just go ahead and do the algorithm from here. And then once that's done, we go ahead and do our 3x3 algorithm, this time from the back side to undo it. Anyway, on to the 5x5. This one should be pretty self-explanatory since you don't have to deal with any 2x2 business. You just go ahead and do a 3x3 pattern on the outer layers, and then another 3x3 pattern on these inner layers. So once you've chosen your colors, the first algorithm will start off looking something like this. There we go. We now have our outer layer, 3x3, cube and a cube and a cube pattern, and now we just go ahead and do the same algorithm, but on these inner layers. So it'll start out looking like this. And there we go. We now have a cube and a cube and a cube and a cube and a cube, and it was super easy because we didn't have to deal with any of that even layer nonsense. To undo it, you just do the exact same thing. So you start with these inner layers, doing it from the back side, and then continue on to the outer layers. The 6x6 adds one more layer to what we just did. So we're going to start out by doing the 3x3 pattern on the very outer layers. Then we're going to do another 3x3 pattern on these next set of inner layers, and then finally a 2x2 pattern on the very inner layers. So we choose our colors, and the first algorithm starts out like this. There we go. Now the second algorithm starts out like this. And there we go. And now for the final iteration, because this is an even layer cube, we have to do the 2x2 version. So we have to flip it around to the back colors and go ahead and do it on the inner layers just like this. And there we go. Cube and a 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 cube. They just keep on looking even more amazing. So to undo this, of course, you start with the 2x2 version from the front, and then you go ahead and undo both the 3x3 versions from the back. And finally, with the 7x7, it's just 3x3 versions all the way down. So you start on the very outer layers with the 3x3 version like this. There we go. Now we move in one layer to do a 3x3 version like this. There we go. And finally, one more 3x3 version on the innermost layers that you can use, just like this. And ta-da! Cube and a 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 cube. That is the 7x7 version, and that is incredible. Of course, you're going to undo all those algorithms from the backside in the opposite order, so starting in the very inner layers and then moving outward. So yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite patterns, and I hope you can see why. It really just looks so incredible on so many different cubes, but let's move on to the next one. So moving on, we have this sort of snake pattern. I believe it's typically called the anaconda, and it kind of has this sort of line snaking around the entire cube. Now, much like the cube and a cube and a cube, this one is kind of complicated because it requires following along with a pretty big algorithm, but fortunately, there's not much for me to explain. So first off, you just want to choose the 3 colors that you want your pattern to be centered around. I'm just going to stick with white, green, and red. Starting with a solved cube, stick those 3 colors in the upper right position like this, and then just do this algorithm or follow along with my moves. L, U, B prime, U prime, R, L prime, B, R prime, F, B prime, D, R, D prime, F prime. And once again, here is the finished pattern. There are quite a few variations on different snake patterns, but this one is by far my favorite. Anyway, to undo the pattern, all you have to do is turn the cube around to the 3 opposite colors and then repeat that algorithm one more time. So you can rewind to where I did it a little bit more slowly. just do the exact same moves you did from the opposite position, and there you go, your cube is solved. I'm going to jump right up to the 5x5 this time, and as you might expect, the way that we're going to do this pattern on this cube is in 2 different steps, each one just like a 3x3, but on different layers. So we're going to start out by doing it like a 3x3 on the outer layers like this, and then move on to the inner layers like this. So once we choose our colors and have them on the right, we're going to go ahead and do the algorithm just like this on the outer layer of the cube. So exactly the same thing we just did on the 3x3, but just on the outer layer of a 5x5. Then once we've done that, it's the exact same thing, but on the inner layers this time. So exactly what I'm doing here on the inner layers of a 5x5, exact same algorithm, and that will lead us to the finished product. There we go. So as you can see, it gives this cool effect with the colors kind of radiating outward with this sort of multi-layer snake. It's pretty cool looking. And to undo the pattern, you guessed it, we're going to go to the back side of the cube and do the algorithm we just did on the inner layers right here. And then we're going to do the same thing on the outer layers, and that will bring us back to solved. I should mention now that you can do this pattern on an even layer puzzle, except for the 2x2, but it'll just end up looking like the lower odd layer version. So the 4x4 will end up looking like a 3x3, and the 6x6 like a 5x5. So that brings us to the final cube we're going to do this pattern on, which is the 7x7. So of course we're going to start out on these outer layers, move into the next layer in, and then finally to the very inner layer. So we're going to start out with the first algorithm like this. There we go. Now we'll move on to the next one like this. There we go. And finally onto the very inner layer like this. And there we go. Here is the 3-layer deep 7x7 snake pattern. And that just looks really, really cool. I love it. And to undo it, of course, you just flip it over to the back side, do the algorithm on the inner layers, then on the next layer out, and then finally on the very outer layers. So that is the snake pattern in its 3 different varieties. Of course, as always, you can always expand this up to a 9x9, 11x11, 13x13, etc. and make them look even cooler. Anyway, yeah, pretty cool pattern, definitely in my top 5 favorite. And finally, we have the Superflip, a pattern where every single edge on the cube is flipped around. This is probably my favorite Rubik's Cube pattern of all time because even though it may not look too impressive on a 3x3, just wait until you see it on a 7x7. Now, you may have noticed that this video is almost over, and that's because, yes, this is a bit of a teaser, because I recently just made a video on how to make the Superflip on every single puzzle imaginable, from a 3x3 all the way up to a 7x7 and higher. I actually did it on my 13x13, plus how to do it on the Pyraminx, which looks really cool, the Megaminx, which is pretty difficult, and even the Gigaminx. Here's a little sneak peek of that. So if you want to go check that out and learn one of the coolest Rubik's Cube patterns there is, go ahead and click that little button up in the corner or the link down in the description. I'll see you guys there. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I really hope you all enjoyed and learned something, and yeah, go check out how to do the Superflip. I'll see you guys next time.